For what it was worth, I never stole from anybody who would go hungry. Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 108 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about people watching. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me today. And it's kind of a weird day in my house here. We were babysitting our niece, so she was over at our house for a little bit, and then our baby was not really napping, but she's napping now, and my wife is also maybe napping, so I'm taking this time to record right now while everyone else in my house is sleeping. But on important, exciting news, movie theaters are back, and I'm so excited. I got to go to the theater to watch A Quiet Place Part 2, which I'm talking about today. But before I get into the movie itself, I just want to talk about the experience of going back to the theater, and it really was fantastic. For one, it was really busy, and that is really encouraging to me that everyone was waiting for theaters to come back, and there was just this surge of people returning back. And especially because we went on the first day that they were open, which was a Thursday night, and it was full. Like, our showing of A Quiet Place, even with the 15% capacity, it was either almost sold out or sold out. I don't know exactly how many tickets were sold or how full the theater was, but it looked quite full, and we waited a while for everyone else to file out before we got out of our seats and filed into the theater. So it was a really positive experience, especially because all of the people in our audience, they were quiet, they were respectful, they actually watched the movie. I didn't hear any nonsense comments, I didn't hear any inappropriate laughter, I didn't hear any kind of disturbance, which tells me that everyone who was at that movie wanted to be there. It wasn't just on a whim, oh hey yeah, let's go see a movie. It was more with the mentality of, hey, movies are back, let's go, because we've been without them for so long. And that was really encouraging to me for the audience, and especially in a movie like A Quiet Place Part 2, where there's a lot of silence, and a lot of times where if people are whispering in the theater, you're definitely going to be able to hear it just because that's the nature of this movie. And I really appreciated that that wasn't the case. I didn't hear people talking, I didn't hear people whispering, I just experienced the movie. And why don't I talk about this movie, A Quiet Place Part 2? We're going to do non-spoilers first, and then we'll get into some more spoilery stuff. This one is directed by John Krasinski, who also directed the first one. And I just discovered today, while I was doing research for this, now I thought that A Quiet Place Part 2, not Part 2, I thought that the first A Quiet Place was John Krasinski's first time directing. And that is actually not the case. He directed another movie before that one, a smaller film, and I did not write down the title of the movie. So there's some other movie out there that John Krasinski has directed, and he's also directed 3 episodes of The Office. So he has had more experience directing, and I thought that A Quiet Place was his first, like his directorial debut, but that's actually not the case. So I was mistaken on there, and I think actually in my directorial debut episode, I mentioned John Krasinski and A Quiet Place. So if that's the case, I'm sorry about that. That's a mistake on my part. But you learn new things, and then you move on, or whatever, right? So that was interesting to find out. So this one is also directed by him. He also came up with the ideas and the story for this world, but he didn't do the actual writing. He did some writing, but there were other writers involved, so it wasn't written and directed by. Kind of, but not really. And the story for this new one, it takes place pretty much immediately after the first one, where Emily Blunt cocks her gun, and they discover the method for how to kill these alien monsters with the supersonic hearing, or super sensitive hearing, I guess. Yeah, maybe let's go with that. So they figure out how to kill these aliens, and now they can go and kill all these aliens and live their lives. But because of the events of the first movie, their home is pretty much destroyed, and they can't really stay there. But if you remember from the first movie, John Krasinski would light fires every night, and all of his surrounding neighbors would also light fires to let them know, hey, we're out here and we're surviving and we made it another day. So Emily Blunt packs up the kids, puts the baby in a box to keep the baby quiet, and they say, Kate, we need to get to one of these neighbors because we need help because John Krasinski is now dead. They need a provider type person. So they go off to find one of their neighbors, and the story kind of goes from there. And I don't want to say too much else because of spoilers and whatnot, but we have some new characters. We have a bit of an expansion of the world because the first one it felt very small. It was just on this farm and this one family, but now we get to see kind of how this apocalypse type event has shaped the world and how it's affected other people. One thing that I really like about this movie is that it opens with day one. If you remember from the first movie, it keeps tracks of how many days into the apocalypse that they're in, and I think it's 400 and something at this point, but it goes back to day one at the very beginning of the movie, and we get to see kind of what happens, and John Krasinski's alive, and the family is all there, and they're at a baseball game, and the son, who's played by Noah Jupe, but I can't remember the character's name, because people don't talk in these movies, so we don't really know a lot of the characters' names, other than if you specifically look them up or look in the credits. For the most part, it's just silent and sign language, and they don't sign each other's names to each other, because they know who they are, and you know who you're speaking to when you're signing. Like, you're making eye contact when you're making your hand signals, right? So we don't really know the names of the characters. But in this opening, the son is at a baseball game, and they see a thing coming from the sky like a giant meteor, and then that's what the aliens are on, and then the aliens are attacking everybody, and we get this really fascinating and terrifying sequence of Emily Blunt driving her car, and then she's in reverse, and this bus is coming towards her, and the aliens have killed the people on this bus, so it's out of control. And the point of view that we get from inside the car, it's actually quite scary. It's a little bit tense. This movie is quite tense. It's edge of your seat type stuff. I wouldn't describe it quite as a horror. It's definitely a suspense thriller. And my wife, not really enjoying suspense thrillers, did not like this movie at all. She had seen the first one, but she didn't watch it in theaters. We watched the first one just a couple of weeks ago in anticipation for the release of this new one. And so because we watched it at home, it's kind of a different environment, and you can pause and you can get up and you can like cuddle with a baby if you need to. So it was a different experience for her. And then seeing this one in a theater where like all you have is you and the movie, it was a bit of a different experience for her, and she was glaring at me throughout. I could see out the corner of my eye she would turn her head and glare at me because she was not happy about what she was watching. But it was really the only option of things to watch in the theater. There were other things that were more horror-like. I think there's a Conjuring movie out that I'm not going to watch, and there was Cruella out, which we had already seen, and I wanted to see something new. So Quiet Place Part 2 really was the best option of something to go watch. So I apologized to her profusely after it was over because she really didn't like it. But and it's just because this movie is so tense and it's edge of your seat, and there's a lot of moments that really make you feel super anxious, and just the way it's directed and the way the scenes are laid out, I feel it's masterfully done to really make you feel that way, because that's how you're supposed to feel. So that day one opening sequence is really good stuff. A really strong point of this movie is the sound editing. And we get some different perspectives in this movie, and when we bounce back and forth from the daughter Reagan's perspective to everyone else's, because she's deaf, the way the soundscape changes and goes to like muted or completely silent because she doesn't have her hearing aid in, it completely changes how you see the scene and gives you perspective into how she sees the world and how she interprets things. And I felt that was very well executed. I liked that a lot. The first movie, I believe, did win the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, and I wouldn't be surprised if this one was up for grabs as well, because the sound editing really is quite spectacular in this movie. Okay, I just looked it up, and it didn't win for sound editing, but it was nominated for sound editing. And I actually think the sound in this second movie is better than the first, so maybe it will get a win this time around, but who knows? We will find out. And another thing that was improved from the first movie to this movie is the visual effects. this movie has a little bit of a bigger budget and is able to show off the monsters a little bit more, make them look a little bit better, and, put that money where it's supposed to be so that we can be scared of these creatures and kind of freaked out. And the more that we see of them, and the more, like, they're very spider-like in the way that they move, and spiders freak out a lot of people. So obviously this is a kind of shape and movement that, of course, would cause people to be tense. I don't mind spiders so much myself, but I know a lot of people who are just not about being around spiders or liking spiders. It's just no thank you. So there's a lot of things about this movie that are improved from the first one, and I really, really liked. The cast also is very good. Emily Blunt, her character does take more of a backseat in this movie. It's not so much about her as it is about her daughter Reagan. It's definitely more focused on her, but the scenes that Emily Blunt does have, she's really good, and she is very level-headed, like, has a plan, figures it out. One of my negatives about this movie is that Emily Blunt just had a baby in a bathtub and just stepped on a rusty nail and is, like, gearing to go, ready to, like, hike up a mountain. And I just, like, that is so completely unbelievable to me. I can't imagine, like, having a baby in a bathtub and then putting it in a box and carrying that box into a forest and up a hill. Like, that's one of the things that bothers me about this movie, is that it just is unbelievable in that respect, but it also has space aliens, so maybe I am being a little too harsh on it, but I gotta have negatives somewhere, and that's just one thing that bothered me that I noticed about the movie. Also, we never really see her feeding this child. Like, I imagine she's breastfeeding, but is that happening or is that not? This movie doesn't take place on a very long scale of time, like only over the course of 2 or 3 days. So, like, that baby has to have eaten something. It's probably not just sucking back oxygen in that oxygen tank and sitting in a box. It's got to be eating something. But maybe that's, like, because I'm a parent now, I got to think about, okay, the baby needs to sleep every now and then. The baby needs to be changed. The baby needs to be fed. So when is this stuff happening within the course of the movie? I have no idea, because it's not shown to us. But circling back around to Emily Blunt, I like her performance, and I like her character motivations and the stuff that she does in this movie, even though it's not as much as she had to do in the first film. But the main star, like I said, is the character of Reagan, and she is played by Millicent Simmons. Now, this actress is actually deaf in real life, so that's an aspect of her character that she can really portray, because she actually is that, and she understands what it's like to live as a deaf person. So I appreciate that they cast the part that way. And she is very determined in this movie. Like, since her dad died and she knows that they have a method now on how to kill the aliens, she is on a mission to kill as many of them as possible and make it as widespread for other people to kill them as possible. And we're going to get into her plan and what she does more into the spoilery stuff. But it's really her movie. It's focused on her. We get a lot of her character developments and motivations, and she goes on a big journey. The movie is primarily focused on her, but is also really focused on Cillian Murphy's character, who is a new addition to this movie. He's featured right at the beginning in the day one sequence, when we're back to before all of this happened, and then his character comes up again, and his character has all kinds of motivations and things that he's dealing with and going through, and I really appreciated his character as an addition. I also like Cillian Murphy as an actor. I have not watched Peaky Blinders, but one of my friends really highly recommends it. I think I'm eventually going to check it out. I just have too much stuff to watch right now, so I can't at the moment, but I think eventually I'm going to get to that show, and based off of what he says, I think I'm probably going to really like it. But his performance is really good. And then we have the character, can't remember the name of the character, but the actor's name is Noah Jupe, and oh boy, there is one character in every single one of these movies that makes a series of stupid decisions, and that is this little boy in this movie. Everything that he does is dumb, and you want to scream at him the entire time. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You're going to die. You're so stupid. And that's the thing that infuriated me most about this movie, is the decisions that this little boy makes just make no sense. And if you would have thought for 2 seconds, a lot of the bad things that happen in this movie would not happen. If he just, toughened up a little bit, got control of his senses, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that this poor family goes through. But that also being said, his character also doesn't have a ton to do because, like I said, the focus isn't on his character. So, but every time he shows up, he's generally doing something stupid and making me frustrated as ever. But that's just how it goes in these types of movies. There has to be a character like that to induce some kind of tension and help, make the audience care a little bit more or be a little frustrated, incite some sort of emotion. So that's the function of this character, but that doesn't mean I'm particularly happy about it. But overall, this movie, I felt it was a very good continuation of the story. Whether there's going to be a third one or not, I don't know. I think there is more story to tell based off of the things that happened in this movie. But yeah, the performances were good, visual effects were good, sound editing was very good, and I was completely engaged. I feel like this movie is on par with the first one. I don't think it's better or worse. I think it's just as good. So if you enjoyed A Quiet Place, I think you're going to really like A Quiet Place Part 2. That is my recommendation for this. I think now I'm going to move into the spoiler section. So if you have not seen A Quiet Place Part 2, maybe just hit the pause button, go watch the movie. You can come back and we can talk about spoilers later. And that was your official warning. So here we go. The first thing I want to talk about is the moment in this movie that made me cringe the most. And in the first movie, we have Emily Blunt stepping on the nail, and this movie ups it a notch by having the son step in a bear trap, and the bear trap clamps on his leg, and he's silent for a second, and then his adrenaline is kicked in, but then his brain sees what has happened to his foot, and he just starts screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming, and he's attracting the monsters. I don't know if they have a name. I think they're just monsters. But that moment was such a gut punch. The way it was shot, it was so out of nowhere. He steps around the corner, and bam, his leg is in this trap, and is bleeding everywhere, and he's screaming, and it's a very good performance, actually. As much as I was ragging on him in the non-spoiler section, I think he does do a good performance of being a scared little boy who can't think straight. So he steps in this bear trap, and the aliens are coming, but then luckily they're able to use their supersonic hearing system in order to kill the alien, and then that's when Cillian Murphy's character is introduced, but he's limping around, and oh my goodness, it was just one of those moments that really catch you by surprise and just punches you in the face. Another thing that we run into with this movie is the baby crying and the air tank, and the baby in the box, and the baby screaming and crying and running out of oxygen, and that was another thing that made me really anxious and really worried. I didn't think that they were going to maybe kill off the baby in this movie, but they did kill off the 3-year-old boy in the first movie, so I had no idea whether that baby was safe or not, or if the son was safe because of all of his stupid decisions, but that also made me very, very tense. But then luckily we get to the end of the movie and everybody is fine. Kind of. A lot of people die and a lot of people are injured. And Emily Blunt now has a huge gash in her leg and her son can't really walk. So are they safe? I don't know. They need to get to that island, I think. Oh, let's talk about that island. That is very fascinating that the aliens can't swim and they don't like water. So people went to the island, but a lot of them didn't make it in time. So it's just those guys living on the island, and then they played across the sea on the radio to try and get people to come to the island. And those people are living a good life. They have it good. They are not living in silence. They're happy. They have their families. They're having big barbecue cookouts. They're making fires. There is nothing to worry about on that island. And when Reagan and Cillian Murphy get there and kind of ruin everything, that's just another added piece to this puzzle. And Reagan and Cillian Murphy come across these people at the docks, and in an apocalypse story like this, you usually have a group of people who like descend into madness and are doing shady, not very good stuff. So we run into that here. And I don't know really what these people's motivations are because they were such a brief part of the movie, but I would like to learn a little bit more about that. Maybe try to get these people to the island and, make them a little more humane again, like bring them back to the better side of humanity. I would like to see maybe that explored in the third movie. Or now that they have the radio station sending out the signal, they can kill a bunch of the aliens and maybe start to rebuild society, get the word out even more, start killing more of them, and get back to normal kind of thing. And that was one thing about this movie that really hit home, I think, is like when they go to the island and they see these people living normal lives, like it's jarring to them. And when I see people living normal lives, it's jarring to me because we've been living in quarantine and all of this stuff is going on. So it's really a very stark parallel to what's going on in that movie to what's going on here. And seeing people like getting back to normal, it feels strange. Like my mind is so fixated on social distancing and wearing masks and not touching people that when I watch crowds in older movies and like people are shaking hands and smiling and hugging, it makes me uncomfortable. Like I'm squirming in my seat. I'm saying like, well, why are you touching all of these people? What is going on here? And that's just what the COVID world has done to my brain. And so getting back to a normal time where we don't need to feel that way anymore, it's going to be weird and it's going to be jarring, and that's exactly what happens to these characters in this movie. So that life on the island, I really appreciated that aspect of the movie. And then when that one boat floats all the way over and one of the aliens makes it to the island, and now it's a race against time for that alien against Reagan and Killian, and then there's an alien up against Emily Blunt, and there's an alien up against the son and the baby, which actually that might be the same alien that's up against Emily Blunt, I can't remember, but they are just in a race against time to get this radio signal out there and get people safe again. It is just so tense with those dual storylines playing out against each other. I thought it was well edited. And then we finally get to the end where they're playing the radio broadcast signal and you're able to kill the aliens, and then it's over. Like, I don't even remember if Reagan and Cillian Murphy make it back to Emily Blunt and them. I don't think so. I think they're still separated at the end of this. So there's definitely more story to tell and things to figure out and to be told about. And I'm very curious and very excited to see more. I really liked both of these movies. If we get another movie again and it is just as good as these two, that is a very strong trilogy. And we've had a lot of really good trilogies in the last 10 years or so. The John Wick trilogy is really strong. It looks like Quiet Place is shaping up to be really strong. I always talk about the new Planet of the Apes trilogy being amazing. So we have a lot of really strong trilogies out there, when before you had, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Back to the Future. And if you like The Dark Knight Rises, you can count the Dark Knight trilogy. But overall, these first two Quiet Place movies are really, really good. Like, they're both over 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people really like them. So I'm pretty sure it's only a matter of time before we get A Quiet Place Part 3, and I hope that John Krasinski has the ideas in order to keep this series fresh and exciting and bring it to a conclusion in 3 movies and leave it at that. I don't want a bunch of spin-offs. I don't want a bunch of prequels. I just want a trilogy that's completely enclosed and encapsulated in 3 movies, and that is it. It is done. Don't milk that cow until it is dry. Just leave it at that. Because it really frustrates me when a franchise is just beaten to death and we keep getting iterations of something over and over and over again, because I want a nice complete box set, right? And here's a great example. Is they just released a 4K box set of the first 4 Indiana Jones movies. And it should be a complete set, but they're making another movie. So why would I buy a set of 4 movies when a 5th movie is coming out? And then they're going to make a set for that one. And then they're going to make a 6th movie, and then they're going to make a set for that one. So it's frustrating to me as a physical media collector that they release these quote-unquote complete sets and then keep making movies. So that frustrates me a little bit, but I digress. As I said before, A Quiet Place Part 2 is a very good movie. It was very, very good to be back in theaters again, so I'd recommend, if you're able to watch it, go check it out in a theater. And if you've already seen it, I would love to hear from you what your thoughts on the movie is, so please let me know what you thought of A Quiet Place Part 2. You can reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at Pottle Nathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It really means a lot to me. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to subscribe to the show. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and a whole bunch of other places. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about next week. I'm going to come up with a topic, or if you have a suggestion, please feel free to shoot one my way. So keep an eye out for next week's episode, and until then, if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.